I used to be a huge fan of Panasonic cameras. I owned 5 GH5s, and for years we shot every single Fstoppers video with those cameras. But Panasonic fell behind, and even though they had the best video features compared to the competition, they failed to implement the most important new feature of all, and that was reliable continuous autofocus.
So pay attention to that. The most important feature being autofocus. Hang on to that, because we're watching this video by Lee Morris over at Fstoppers, and I have always loved Fstoppers. It's one of the few avenues that got me into professional photography beyond my passion for video and that hybrid balance of doing video and photo. So I owe a lot to Fstoppers and a lot of the tutorials they've done in terms of Photoshop and behind the scenes, headshots, etc. If you are into photography, if you're into video, you've definitely heard of Fstoppers, and I wanted to watch Lee Morris's review of the Lumix S1 Mark II because I think it's good perspective on where Lumix is at in the marketplace, coming from somebody who is a professional in terms of covering cameras, production, workflows, etc. So let's take a look at this and hang on to that thought that autofocus is the most important component to a camera and a reason to abandon Lumix in favor of some other platforms that we're going to get into.
For years, it's felt like every camera brand has reliable autofocus except for Panasonic. Until now. So
I think this kind of highlights maybe a gap in terms of knowledge, or just, there's so many camera platforms, there's so many lenses, and it's a little overwhelming. Once you kind of pick your favorite ecosystem, whether it's Sony, Nikon, Canon, Lumix, etc., you kind of get a little bit of tunnel vision. And I think Lumix has definitely suffered from that because the S1 Mark II is not the first Lumix camera to have reliable autofocus. You could go back a couple years to the G9 Mark II, the S5 Mark II. Any of the Lumix cameras that finally embraced phase detect have had good, reliable autofocus, and that has gotten better over the years with improvements in terms of firmware, and the S1 Mark II is the latest and greatest from Lumix, but it's certainly not the first to have reliable autofocus. Of course, we've covered it before. For years, the depth from defocus algorithm or tech that Panasonic was using, the DFD, it was terrible. You would get autofocus for photography, and yes, it could autofocus in video, but it would always pulse, and the backgrounds would be moving. And of course, everyone already knows, and I'm just kind of catching us all up to speed so we're all on the same page. But you already know this. Everyone knows that Sony really pioneered the autofocus tech, really perfected it early on a long time ago. So if you look at cameras from that perspective in terms of autofocus, yes, Sony has been killing it. Canon, Nikon, etc., they all embraced phase detect before Panasonic, to Panasonic's detriment. We all know this, but we're up to speed. However, the S1 Mark II is not the first or the only Lumix camera that can do this. We've had this for a couple years, but if you have that tunnel vision where you're just looking at Sony, or you're just looking at Nikon, or you're just looking at Canon, kind of still thinking that Lumix is not really pulling their weight in terms of autofocus, you are a little bit late to the party from that perspective.
Is the Panasonic Lumix S1II. It's Panasonic's newest mirrorless camera. And aside from one major flaw, this is everything I want in a hybrid camera. But can I recommend this camera? More importantly, can I recommend the Panasonic ecosystem? Let's talk about it.
So Lee mentions a fatal flaw, which we'll get to because I have seen this video before, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. It's interesting, and I have my own thoughts. We all have our own opinions and perspectives. But if the one major flaw is the one that he points out, it's one I personally wouldn't consider, but we'll get to it.
For the last 5 years, anytime somebody has asked me for a camera recommendation, I give the exact same answer. For the most part, every camera today is amazing. You can't go wrong buying basically any modern camera from Sony, Nikon, or Canon. And this doesn't mean that other cameras from other manufacturers are bad. In some cases, they are better, but it just comes down to the ecosystem and market share. If you decided to buy into Pentax years ago, I guarantee you are regretting that decision today. In 2019,
this is something I've also talked a lot about. Popularity, market share is important when you're adding newbies, amateurs, enthusiasts, hobbyists, people just getting into the profession or the art, however you want to look at it. to make a recommendation towards Lumix would come with a lot of baggage historically. Nowadays, I'm a lot more eager. It's a lot easier to recommend Lumix because it is full frame. The autofocus is certainly good enough to the point where anyone could use it. And you're just looking at it from, okay, what are the lenses? What are the price points? There's things like Canon and the RF mount that's a little bit more limited in lens selection. So you know that you're only going to recommend that to somebody who has budget to spend on equipment. Whereas Sony, it's a lot easier to recommend to pretty much anybody because, you know, for the most part, those cameras can get the job done and they can find lenses at any price point. And really, that's kind of those people that ask you that question. Well, hey, what's the good camera? What should I get? You know that their knowledge, their education, their information on cameras is so low that you have to recommend something that's pretty much bulletproof, which is why Sony has eaten up so much of the market because they've created that platform from beginner to intermediate to advanced, professional, even at the cinema level. Sony has it all covered. And that's why it's so easy to recommend it to somebody just getting in because you know, hey, you're going to be happy with what you have. The autofocus is going to work. You're going to find a lens that's going to meet your needs. And for the most part, as long as you're not too demanding from the camera, it's going to work. Me, there's a lot of times where I've wanted to recommend Sony to myself. Like I had the A7S III and then sold it because it didn't live up and meet my expectations. But for a newbie, it's very easy to recommend Sony and historically been harder to recommend Lumix. And thankfully that is changing a little bit.
Panasonic launched the S1, their first full-frame mirrorless camera with a completely new mount. I remember hearing about this camera and thinking, who would buy into a brand new ecosystem when there are so many other established brands already? Panasonic knew this would be an uphill battle, and they created the L-Mount Alliance with both Leica and Sigma. This meant that 3 major camera brands were combining forces to create a large
which the L-Mount Alliance has expanded beyond that now. You've got DJI, you've got Blackmagic, you have other companies joining the L-Mount Alliance. So there was an uphill battle, as Lee mentions, and to their credit, they have over time expanded that L-Mount Alliance. Not to the point that I think any of us are happy and thinking that it's the best that it can be. There's a lot of room for growth there. There's a lot of potential, a lot of opportunity for the L-Mount Alliance to get better in terms of cameras and lenses. So still room for improvement, but they have done it. And what's interesting about the S1 launch is that, yes, it didn't have phase detect, which I think Lee is going to mention here in a second, but it also came at a pretty bad time.
Larger ecosystem. And believe it or not, there are now more L-mount lenses that you can buy than Canon RF lenses. You can get ultra cheap third-party L-mount lenses, entry-level semi-pro lenses like this one right here, the 24-60 f2.8, pro-level lenses like
I'm really excited for that lens to come out. I think it will be an instant buy for me. However, I am hoping that they bundle it with a camera and had a discount because that would actually, be what I ultimately want. If I'm buying a new camera and a new lens, put them together, give me a little discount, that would make me pretty happy.
Like these made by Panasonic or Sigma, or outrageously priced lenses by Leica. For example, why would you buy Sigma's 50mm 1.2 lens when you could buy the slower Leica version for $7,000? Why buy Panasonic's fixed aperture 16 to 35mm when you can buy Leica's variable aperture version for $7,000? And if sports are
This is such a good point, and it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it hits the nail on the head. Leica is dropping the ball when it comes to the L-mount. Leica, L-mount. Wake up. Come on, Leica. Give us something that we can, that's attainable, that's interesting. If we're going to spend that much money on a lens, make it worth it.
Wildlife is important to you, Sigma just announced their new 300 to 600mm f4 lens, which many people are calling the greatest ultra telephoto lens ever made. All right, so the lenses do exist, but what about the hot shoe and flashes? This camera does have its own proprietary hot shoe. All standard dumb triggers.
So here's where we get into some of the very specific photography needs of these Lumix cameras, which they have struggled. Me personally, it hasn't been the biggest issue because those aren't things that I necessarily need or demand of my camera from a photography perspective, but it is a valid point if your primary focus is photography, specifically flash.
But if you want automatic TTL metering, you're going to need a trigger designed specifically for Panasonic. A few months ago, I did a big comparison review video of all of the major speed lights currently on the market, and sadly, only one of these brands makes triggers and flashes specifically designed for Panasonic. Luckily, that brand is Godox, who happens to make my favorite flash and my favorite trigger. So the Panasonic ecosystem is much larger than I thought, but they're still at a massive disadvantage simply due to market share. For me to recommend that you buy a Panasonic camera over anything made by Sony or Canon, this camera is either going...
And again, hitting the nail on the head visually and with the narration, talking about Panasonic when all the cameras say Lumix, the strap says Lumix, it's a really hard thing to market when the brand confusion. I think this is one of the biggest problems with Panasonic and Lumix, because how do you talk about something with two completely different terms where Sony is Sony? You say Sony, it says Sony on the camera. You say Canon, it says Canon on the camera. You say Nikon, it says Nikon on the camera. People talk about Panasonic and then the cameras all say Lumix, and there's not even a Lumix website still to this day. You go to panasonic.com to buy Lumix cameras. It's so incredibly frustrating just from a communication perspective. How do you talk about these things in a way that your regular everyday consumer is going to understand? There's plenty of people who I talk to on a daily basis, not the people on the internet, not the people watching YouTube, not the people consuming this content, because you all get it, but regular people, regular professionals, videographers, photographers out there in the wild. Oh yeah, Lumix, what are you shooting with? Oh, I think I've heard of that. Oh, I was thinking about it. Like the education level is so low that even talking about Panasonic and Lumix to this day is not clear. People don't understand it. And this illustrates the point. At least talking about Panasonic showing a strap that says Lumix on it.
Going to have to be significantly cheaper or significantly better. And spoiler alert, it is not cheaper. This camera is pretty expensive. So it's going to have to be a lot better.
I didn't say it was expensive. Lee said it was expensive. So remember that, because when I say the price, is a little bit high, oh, it's professional tool, it's for your business. It doesn't matter what the price is. That's foolish. You're always comparing it to other things on the market. And if there are things cheaper that do similar things, you're going to be labeled as expensive.
And I got to tell you, it is in almost every way. The S1II feels great. The button layout feels much more intuitive than my Sony cameras.
Hallelujah. Thank you for mentioning this. The button layout is critical. One of the reasons I've stuck with Lumix for so long, because the buttons just make sense. The interface, the switches, especially if you've watched my coverage in my videos on the autofocus, manual focus switch and how all that works, it is so much better than a bunch of random custom buttons that aren't labeled, you don't know what they do, and they're never in a configuration that makes any sense. Like the ISO, the white balance, it's all just randomly sprayed across the camera. I'm talking about the A7 Mark IV, but Sony is guilty of this to a crazy degree, where the Panasonic Lumix cameras, the button layout just makes sense.
The screen on the back flips in every direction, even
nice flippy
forwards,
screen.
But it also tilts up and down in place, which makes it even better than my Sony screens. The electronic viewfinder on this camera is fantastic, second only to Sony's newest A9 III's viewfinder, which is so good, I sometimes forget that it's not an optical viewfinder.
Nice
but
viewfinder.
When I compare the electronic viewfinder to the Sony cameras that I actually own, that are a few years old now, there is no comparison. The Panasonic looks so much better. The S1II
The
is the
Panasonic,
most
as he touches a
feature-rich
camera that says Lumix
I
on
have
it.
ever used. This camera has so many shooting resolutions, aspect ratios, and frame rates that they had to design a filtering system so that you can actually find what you're looking for.
So that filtering system has been around for quite a while. I don't know which Lumix camera got it first, but I remember the day when I realized you could filter and save your video modes to your custom menu. It is a game changer. If you're still scrolling through all the various codecs on Lumix, there is a better way. Display filtering and then saving to a My Recording settings. I think that's what it's called. I forget exactly the terminology in the menu, but you can save just the codecs you use, and it's so much better to have like 4 or 5 options instead of 30, but I'm glad all 30 are there. This is the nice benefit of having so many options and then giving you a good way to filter it. And Lumix has been doing this for quite a while.
This is also the most customizable camera I've ever used. If you like the way another camera works or the location of certain function buttons, you have complete control over every aspect of this camera. The downside to all of these features and options is that this camera will require days or weeks to fully set up. Gearheads will love it, but even I, as somebody who shot Panasonic for years, still feel lost in these menus.
This is why I love Lumix. If you like the dials to rotate a certain direction or you want to switch which dial does what, you can do that, but you don't have to. The cameras come working, in their default setup perfectly, but if you want to tinker, you want to toy, you want to make it feel a certain way, you can absolutely do that. And yes, the menu is overwhelming maybe, but I think almost every camera menu is overwhelming. Dig through the menu on a Sony FX6 and it's a nightmare. Go through the Nikon menus, the Canon menus. They're all pages and pages and pages of settings, all called different things. But I would say for the most part, Lumix gets it right. There are a few settings that have the strangest names, but the same is true of Sony and Nikon as well. I still to this day don't understand why Sony has creative styles and picture profiles. And then even within the picture profiles, they can be totally different. Like PP9, you can change it to be something different. And that's an overwrite to the basic color profiles. It's very strange why these things are separated to the degree that they are. But if you're familiar with Sony and you get used to it, you just get used to it. Lumix, I think, is the same way. Once you dive in and you understand how it works and you just go through the menu, it's pretty intuitive from there.
Now, I could literally make a 5-hour video about all of the features of this camera, but instead, I'm just gonna quickly touch on a few of my favorites. This is a 24 megapixel camera. For video shooters like me, I can film in 6K, it's perfect. But for still photographers, they may want a little bit more resolution. If you're taking pictures of a relatively still subject.
But that's where I want, that's the beauty of a hybrid, is that 24 megapixels is enough for good photography, right? I sold the A7S III because the megapixels it wasn't enough for photography. Yeah, it makes good video, and same thing for the FX3, but it's heavily weighted in one side of that equation compared to the other. And I am a hybrid shooter. I want to do both video and photo. I don't need a photography camera that can do 50 megapixels or 100 megapixels, even though these Lumix cameras can do that with the high resolution modes where it kind of blends a bunch of pictures together. I use it very rarely, but it is an option if you need it for still static scenes. 24, 25 megapixels, great sweet spot, getting 6K video, high resolution photography. Go back 10, 20 years, and professional photographers were shooting with far less megapixels because technology has just advanced so much. The tech just gets better. And so there is that point of diminishing returns. You go for a high resolution sensor, all of a sudden Lightroom is slowed down. Your computer lags and chugs because those photos are just so massive. So you got to invest in that side of the equation. There's always a time and a place for it. But if you want that sweet spot as a content creator, as a hybrid shooter, Lumix has a really nice place. The same is true of the S5 Mark II, which is one of my favorite cameras of all time. 24 megapixel sensor, makes great video and great photo. Everything is easy to edit, but still high resolution to the point where you would want it. And let's not forget, if you need more resolution, there's all these AI upscaling options nowadays. So this, when you're looking at all the features, it's not like one automatically wins just because it's higher or bigger or better. You have to look at it across the board, all the features added together and how they all add up and work together. That's what I'm always looking for in a camera. I'm not looking for the camera that does one thing the best. I'm looking for the camera that does a lot of things really well, and combined, those features add up to more than what any other camera is doing. And that's what I've always found with the Lumix cameras. They just add so much across the board that combined together, it just makes sense.
Turn on high resolution mode and it will take multiple pictures and combine them to create a much higher resolution shot. But they also have a handheld mode which works incredibly well. This camera has pre-burst shooting that silently captures pictures in the background, and when you decide to actually take the picture, it will save images captured up to 1.5 seconds in the
Lots
past.
of cool features.
Panasonic cameras have always had
pre-burst, high res
functions. You can either record video with a shutter speed as low as 1/2 of a second, and it will create a smooth time-lapse video in camera. Or if you want longer shutter speeds, you can shoot images, and after you're done, the camera will turn those images into a time-lapse video automatically. We use this feature exclusively truly, when we filmed hundreds of time-lapse
Lumix cameras
videos
have
for
always
our
had some of the
Photographing the World
best
photography
time-lapse
tutorial
features,
series,
hands down.
and it was a game changer. The S1II can shoot video in 16:9 6K using the full width of the sensor, or you can shoot ungated, allowing you to shoot in a 3:2 aspect ratio to take
Open gate.
advantage of the entire sensor.
Need I
This
say
makes
more?
editing vertical video from horizontal footage easier, and it allows you to shoot with anamorphic lenses, and the camera has
Anamorphic,
de-squeezing
and for
playback,
content
so you
creators,
don't need an additional
vertical, horizontal.
monitor.
It's
If you shoot
beautiful.
in 4K, you can turn on hybrid zoom, which uses the entire width of the sensor when you're
Hybrid
zoomed
zoom is
out.
awesome.
And as you zoom in physically on the lens, it will digitally crop in. And when you reach the end of the physical zoom on your lens, it will have cropped in to an APS-C sized portion of the sensor, giving you an additional
It works
1.5 times
flawlessly.
reach without losing any resolution.
No buttons to
Apparently,
hit,
there was a
no
bit of an
levers to
uproar
pull,
when it
just
comes
zoom,
to the
and
sensor
you zoom
read
further.
speed and the rolling shutter of Panasonic's last higher resolution mirrorless camera. I don't have the exact numbers, but when I compare this camera to my Sony a7S III, it looks comparable, if not a little bit better. Autofocus on this camera finally works. The S1II finally has face detect autofocus that is reliable enough to be left on all the time. When it comes
I would say that is true of the S5 Mark II. I don't know, maybe at launch it was not as good as the S1 Mark II at launch, but certainly over the time that the S5 Mark II has been out, the autofocus is really good. So I don't know if Lee just like, maybe he tested the S5 Mark II when it came out, and so that was kind of a bad taste, saying, oh, that's not good enough. But it's gotten a lot better. Lumix across the board, the phase detect is great in the S9, the G9 Mark II, gosh, the S1R Mark II, now the S1 Mark II, the S1 Mark IIe, like they all have it now, any new Lumix camera. Let's not forget the GH7, all have phase detect. Thankfully, Panasonic, Lumix, finally embraced phase detect. A little bit too late. And I did mention, he didn't mention it, but that launch of the S1, so going back a little bit in this video, the S1, that whole lineup launching when it did, not having phase detect, huge miss by Panasonic. But let's not forget that was also right before COVID and 2020 hit, pandemic, and then all the new cameras came out later that year from Canon and Sony, the a7S III, the R5. So there was like this weird peak where like pre-COVID, Panasonic launches all these flagships, then COVID happens, and it's like, oh, yikes. Then as COVID, everyone kind of settles in, people are getting, their stimulus checks and all these things. Then Canon and Sony launch coming out of that. It's just a interesting timeline of events. Had the S1 lineup had phase detect, I think it would have been more popular, certainly from the beginning. Certainly one thing that held me back from the S1H back in the day is just not having good, reliable phase detect autofocus. So do I need it? Is it the most important feature? No, but also it's a very important feature that I do want in a camera of that price point. So that's where it's just unfortunate, really bad timing from Panasonic and Lumix, and totally out of their control in terms of COVID and that whole timeline. But the phase detect, they definitely could have done earlier, and they really should have.
Comes to stabilization, my Sony cameras aren't great. The S1II has the best stabilization I have ever used. For true walking shots, you're still gonna want a gimbal, but I do this test just to show you how powerful their stabilization is.
And this is where I would argue that autofocus is so overhyped and overemphasized that yes, you want good autofocus, of course, but do you need the best autofocus and the worst stabilization? I don't know. That's up to you to decide. For me, having good stabilization is just as important as having good, reliable autofocus. So if I can have a camera that does good autofocus and good stabilization, and let's not forget all the other great features like open gate, etc., now you start to build that picture of, okay, all these features are working together and I have a tool that can do everything really well compared to other cameras where they might be really good, best in class at one thing, but then they kind of miss the mark at a bunch of other things. That's a hard trade-off for me to make. And unfortunately, so many people have overemphasized autofocus, 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 and really ignored all the other areas where other cameras suffer and struggle and fall behind. Do you need pixel perfect autofocus? Yeah, but don't you also want really good stabilization too? Don't you also want open gate? Don't you also want all these other things? Overheating, let's not forget that one, such a big one. Hey, I've got perfect autofocus, but the camera overheats every 30 minutes. I don't know how you square that, but I think from a YouTuber perspective, people making content for YouTube, filming themselves, autofocus has gotten so much of that limelight. So much attention has been drawn to just autofocus. And all these other things are almost like, oh yeah, yeah, IBIS, yeah, whatever. No, it's all important. And I wish more of it was emphasized, to Panasonic Lumix's credit, that these other things are good and maybe just as important. And I think that just didn't play out the way they wanted it to, with having such bad autofocus for so long in video. You know, hindsight's 2020. Maybe they thought internally, hey, we're going to figure it out one day. We're going to figure this DFD, depth from defocus thing out. It'll be perfect eventually. And they just never cracked the code. Finally switching to phase detect, you know, pivoting earlier would have been far better. But also from a review content creator standpoint, so many people have talked about how important autofocus is. And it is important. Don't hear me wrong. It is really important, and certainly something I use all the time, but also I'm really just as excited about good IBIS too.
The highest level of stabilization is called Boost IS. It's made to make handheld footage look like it was shot on a tripod. This is what handheld footage at 300 millimeters looks like naturally. This is what it looks like when I turn on Boost IS. It's incredible.
I wish he wasn't filming a flower for this, because the flower itself is moving. If you shoot with Boost image stabilization, it is impressive how stable it is. This is a longer lens, 300 millimeters, but you know, at the wide end, if you shoot with Boost, it does look like you're on a tripod. So use it when you want that static lockdown look as if you are on a tripod. Don't use Boost if you're walking around moving, trying to get more gimbal-like stuff. That's where the E-stabilization, both standard and high, work really well. They even have the no crop mode now, which I haven't personally tested, but you do have to understand how the stabilization system works in these Lumix cameras. And Boost is not as clear. Like I think they should have just called it tripod mode or something like that. Locked, or maybe something like Boost. It doesn't seem to me to be like a tripod, but it's more like terminology, understanding the menus, understanding how all these features work. If that flower wasn't moving, this shot would look much more stable. But hey, whatever. You can tell from the shot as well.
In terms of low light performance, the S1II seems to have around one stop better ISO performance than my A7S III. Sony does have 3 additional ISO stops. However, I'm not sure how usable they actually are. So it's been hard to find anything that I dislike about this camera, but I finally found something, and it's a pretty big deal. Probably my favorite thing about my Sony cameras is the way their autofocus system works. I leave my autofocus zone on wide, which uses the entire sensor, and then most of the time I leave human face detection on all the time. If I ever want to focus on something other than a person, I just touch that object on the back of the screen and it will track whatever object I click on. The S1II is not that simple. You can either automatically detect subjects, or you have to turn that off and move into a tracking mode if you want to touch to track something. This itself is a massive inconvenience, but I don't think you're gonna worry about that much because this entire feature is basically unusable. The tracking isn't accurate at all. It will jump around the frame or turn itself off as soon as the subject or camera begins to move. What's so strange about this is that Panasonic solved the hard part, automatically detecting and tracking a human eye.
So I wanted to let him get the point out fully because this is interesting. This is one of those features that, as someone who comes from Lumix, I don't even know that I'm missing, but also I don't know how it would change that I shoot. This is something that everyone should understand. The cameras you use, the tools you use affect how you shoot. They influence your style, your workflow, your habits, your routine. And I think that goes unspoken a lot of the time. Most people think what they're doing, oh, that's just the way everyone does it. And yet the camera itself dictates the features that you're using and thus how you're shooting. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's almost this reciprocal thing. A lot of times you would think, oh, the artist, the creator does what they do the way they want to do it, but so much is influenced by the tool itself. I've never used tracking in the Lumix cameras ever. I've never had the need, I've never had the want or the desire, and I've never really noticed if it worked well or not because I just didn't even care to use it. It was not part of my style. And if it doesn't work, maybe that at some point is why I decided, oh, I just don't need that. I don't want that. So I'm not sure why it's so important to Lee, but again, if you're coming from Sony and the tracking works well and you're using it a lot for some reason, like I don't know what that would be, but it's just interesting how those tools affect our mindset of what's important. Because if you told me Sony has great tracking, I'd say, oh, all right, like I don't need that. But for Lee to test the Lumix and say, oh, it doesn't have good tracking, this is a fatal flaw, I can't recommend it, that's kind of baffling to me because I don't ever need that feature. Hopefully that makes sense. It's very weird. Yes, clearly the Sony tracking works much better than the Lumix, but again, I've never had a need to use that feature ever in all the time I've been, like in 20 years, I've never needed to track something, focus in that way. I don't know. I'm not really framed. I can move the box to what I like take the picture of or shoot the video of. I don't know. Baffling, but it's probably influenced the way I shoot as well. I just haven't done certain types of shots because I didn't have that feature set. But also, if I don't know I'm missing it, am I really missing it? It's interesting.
Anywhere in the entire frame seems way more difficult than tracking a small contrasty spot that I click on. It seems like Panasonic could easily fix this with a firmware update, and Panasonic is known to constantly improve their cameras with software.
Like those kinds of shots. I know this is just demo example, but I'm struggling to think like professionally, what type of shot would I need to track something, but then be moving the camera ever so slightly around it? I mean, I might just have it like focus on the thing and flip to manual because if I'm not getting closer, if I'm not getting further away, me tilting and panning around isn't going to change my distance from my subject. So that I would have to see the example of where I need tracking. That's not a face, that's not a human, that's not a car, a motorcycle, a train, a plane, or any other great tracking things they have now. Even the sports mode, you can do apparently breakdancing and all sorts of stuff. I'm trying to really think of what scenario would I need to track something that's not a person and I would physically be moving to such a degree that it's still in my frame, but I need it to track. I can't imagine the shot, but please show me if you have something out there. If you've seen that done, show me what I'm missing. I just haven't ever had the need or the desire.
But I still wouldn't hold your breath. To convince new shooters to buy Panasonic over the much more popular competition, they needed to create a camera that was objectively better than what is currently on the market. And that's basically what they did. In almost every category, the S1II is the current king of hybrid shooters. It has better ergonomics, better hardware, better resolution, better stabilization, better ISO performance, more features, more customization. The L-mount ecosystem and lens selection is far more robust than I realized. Face detection autofocus actually works now, but the other major
Again, actually works now. It's been working.
Focus feature.
There's a lot of stuff I don't know about Nikon or Canon or Sony too. It's just funny, different people's perspectives. If you're not in it, you do have a very different perspective.
The one that I use on literally every video job that I do, spot tracking at this.
That's crazy to me that Lee is using this on every job because I guess if the Sony system works that well and you get used to it, it just becomes the way you shoot. But me on the flip side, I've never needed to track. I've never wanted to. I'll just keep saying it. I just don't. It's so strange to, hear from somebody, oh, I use this all the time on every job. And I'm going like, I've literally never needed or used that ever. And yet there's so many things in the Lumix cameras that are critical to the way that I film. The autofocus, manual focus switch being one of them, toggling human subject detection on or off. Like the Sony cameras, I would argue, are more limiting when it comes to the focus zones because I always struggle. The box for Sony focus is the large, medium, small. There really isn't that big of a difference. I can't go full width all the way down to a pinpoint like I can on Lumix. The Lumix autofocus system, I feel like, is far more flexible and forgiving in terms of where you want that zone, how big you want the zone. I love it. And I always struggle when I'm shooting on Sony to get the same results. So it's just so different how two completely different people using different systems develop their own style, needs, wants, desires, etc., based on the tool itself, and how that's reinforced looking at, from the other perspective. Hey, I'm looking at Sony going, it doesn't do X, Y, and Z. And Leah's looking at Lumix going, it doesn't do X, Y, and Z. And they're different needs, they're different wants, because we're reinforcing our own style by the tool that we're using. Just kind of interesting, I thought.
This point does not work. Even still, the list of advantages that this camera has over the competition is gigantic. And if you're looking for a hybrid video camera, you should at the very least consider the Panasonic Lumix S1II. Well guys, thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this.
You see, he said it there, Panasonic Lumix. And I have to say it all the time. I wish I could just say Lumix. And I ought to, because that's what the cameras are called. It says Lumix on there. On the strap, it says Lumix. It says Lumix everywhere. So I wish we could just stick away from this whole Panasonic thing. It is helpful, I guess, for people who don't really know. Because yeah, if you're going to Panasonic's website to buy a Lumix camera, why does that make any sense? But it's so silly, the brand confusion. These two completely different sounding names. And we've been talking about this for so long that I remember it was probably 10 years ago, someone left a comment on the video that Panasonic would just be too big to put on the camera. And that's probably true. Lumix is a shorter word, more in line with Canon, Nikon, Sony, that it fits nicer on these hybrid cameras. But if that is really the main thing, then please double down, give Lumix its own website, give it its own brand, its own identity, so we don't have to keep confusing people with Panasonic Lumix. And people wondering, I've never seen a Panasonic photography camera. What are you talking about? Oh, well, yeah, it's Lumix. Well, how does that make any sense? Regardless, it's a point I've hit on far too much over the last 10 years probably, and it's still an issue to this day. Maybe I'm the only one who thinks this, but I think from a brand marketing perspective, it's just super silly that we're still in 2025 in this place.
This review, I know most of the people watching this are probably videographers, but if you happen to be a still photographer, we are running photography contests every single month and they are totally free to join. You can check those out at fstoppers.com/contest. And we currently have one of the lowest prices ever on one of our most popular Fstoppers tutorials ever. You can check that out and all of our other tutorials, including photographing the world, which we have filmed almost exclusively.
Fstoppers, I'll say it again. I started the video this way. I'll end it this way. Great resource. Even if you're new to photography and video, the Fstoppers website now has over a decade, probably, I don't know exactly when it started, but certainly over a decade worth of content that you can go back and is probably just as good as it was back when it first came out. Yes, the technology changes. At one point we were all shooting with DSLRs. Now everything's mirrorless. Obviously, we used to be shooting video at 1080p. Now everything is 4K and above, but the tools, the techniques, all that stuff, a lot of it is still valid. So go check out Fstoppers. It is a great resource beyond just what you can find on YouTube. Articles, tutorials. It's very valuable and awesome that this type of content and these type of resources exist, because it's helped me a ton in my career, learning and growing and advancing. And okay, that's how you do it. I understand now. And it's really cool that so much of that is just for free, or if you do have to buy it, it's worth the investment probably for your own career and your own skill set. So definitely go to Fstoppers and check it out. And I appreciate Lee for putting together this video. I just wanted to comment on a few of the parts that I thought were interesting or maybe just different from my perspective.